Welcome in. This is Erik McKinney, joined by Greg Katz. And Greg, we're talking USC's trip out to Utah. The 2-0 Trojans, now the barely 2-0 Trojans, but still the 2-0 Trojans make the trip out to Salt Lake City for a Saturday night game against Utah. This is going to be Utah's first game of the season. It is the third game in a row where USC's opponent is playing their season opener, and it is shaping up to be a chilly one out in Utah. And I know for you and for me, this is a game that has taken on kind of significance in the Pac-12. This has become a really nice Pac-12 South rivalry between these two teams.
Yes, it has. And, it's going to be one of those games where USC, as you mentioned, is going into the third game. And as you mentioned, Utah is playing its first. And I don't know why I have the feeling that Utah going into its first game is meaningless. Probably because the last game that Arizona was going into its first game, and the Trojans pulled one out at the end. And you have to remember that Kyle Willingham is 11-0 streak in home openers, and I don't discount that. His team will be ready. They will be physical. They may be inexperienced in some things, but they're going to come to hit. And, the weather could be in the low 30s because it's an 8:30 kickoff time at Utah. And, it's going to be an interesting conflict. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, Whittingham, the longest tenured coach in the Pac-12, and he's done very well. Utah and USC have flopped wins over the last handful of years. So this is going to be an always difficult trip to Salt Lake City. And we'll start off, we'll look at kind of the injury department for USC right now in the team that they take over. It's at least we kind of have an idea what the USC roster at this point is going to look like. Utah on the other side, 70-80% of its roster available according to the Utah athletic director. But for USC, right in the center on both lines, that's kind of the question mark right now. USC played against Arizona without center Brett Nealon. He suffered an ankle sprain in that season opener against Arizona State. Clay Helton said on Thursday, looks like things are trending the right way for him. He was able to practice this week and called it a game time decision, but sure feels like, leaning a little bit towards being able to get him back and playing. Then on the defensive line, two big ones. Brandon Peely, who broke his finger right before the season opener, did not play against Arizona State. Did not play against Arizona. Clay Helton said he has practiced, and there is a chance that they get him back for Saturday. Caleb Tremblay, who suffered stingers late last week, did not suit up against Arizona. Again, seems like things are trending in a positive direction for him to be able to play on Saturday. And again, all this could kind of go out the window with a late week setback, but those are three, I think, big names on the line. And then a guy that it feels like USC probably won't have available on Saturday is linebacker Paulaie Naoteote. He left the Arizona game was in concussion protocol. Clay Helton again on Thursday said still in concussion protocol and very doubtful, he called him, for Saturday's game. In your mind, of those injuries, of that situation, the biggest one for you, the one that might mean the most on Saturday?
No question, the OT, because that the experience of Utah is on that offensive line, okay? And when you take a look at that, you take a look at who USC is going to start. Now, Kanai Maga has plenty of experience. He's coming off an injury. So I'm not really all that concerned about his physical status and his experience status. Now, Goforth is young. He's going to be in with the big boys, and Utah puts on the big boy pants when they play. And I look that it's not going to be those two guys throughout the game. You're going to be looking at Raymond Scott, who's been basically actually a surprise for the defense, rotating between safety and linebacker. And they like what they're seeing. And the big key is going to be Tuavisi Nomura, who's the redshirt freshman out of Corona Centennial. And this is going to be a manly test for him. So it's kind of like you're going to start off with these two linebackers you know, and then the rotation begins, and I can guarantee you that Whittingham is going to test those guys early and often. And if it ain't broken, don't fix it. He'll continue to pound away because they want to make it a shorter game. They want to have ball possession, and they want to make sure that the ball is not in the hands of Keaton Slovis on offense.
Yeah, I think Brandon Peely becomes a big piece for this because of what you said. You're going to want to keep those offensive linemen away from those linebackers. And I think getting a veteran guy like that can come in, spell Marlon Tuipulotu for a little bit, or maybe even the two of them, line up next to each other on the defense. I think he might be a big key. But again, losing a experienced linebacker like EA for this game, that's not where you don't want to go in shorthanded at all in the front seven against Utah. And we'll kind of stick a little bit with that theme right now, and we'll get into USC's defense and against that Utah offense. For me, that's the biggest question of the game, just in terms of personnel, is Utah's quarterback situation. I mentioned at the top that you almost know for a fact they're not going to have every starter listed on their two deep available. It feels like once you kind of take a chunk out of the roster based on kind of COVID protocols and what they have to go through there, you're going to lose a few guys. But at quarterback, it feels like from USC side a ton of confusion right now at who they'll see, and they're going to be watching those pregame warmups to see which quarterback is going with the first group. And you've got a quarterback in Drew Lisk, a senior, started his career at Utah as a walk-on, and then a guy in Jake Bentley who has a ton of experience, but all of that experience coming at South Carolina, where he was named the starting quarterback as a true freshman, eventually transfers to Utah. And then they've got another transfer quarterback, Cameron Rising, who came to Utah from Texas. So Utah's got to find a new quarterback. They lost Tyler Huntley, who had been a longtime starter there. And then they lost Zach Moss. And for me, that's the big loss, looking at the difference between last year's Utah team and this year's Utah team. Running back Zach Moss not there anymore. It feels like, they've got Devin Brumfield and they've got Jordan Wilmore as those two guys. I'm going to turn it over to you. Your biggest key in that matchup, Utah with the ball against USC's defense that we mentioned, maybe a couple guys back, maybe a guy not going to be there on Saturday.
Well, first of all, I'm not as concerned about who Utah starts, because Utah is going to have a system. They're a balanced team. They're going to run the ball down your throat until you prove you can stop it, and then they'll throw. In other words, they'll set up the pass through the run. So my feeling is it's going to get down to the Utah offensive line, as I said before, against the SC front seven. Moss was a great back, but let's remember this. That Jordan Wilmore was recruited and was a verbal at one time for the Trojans. And you know what? Not like last year where Moss got injured and then, they were like unprepared. Let's say that's kind of like a emotional deflation when Moss, who was such a great player for them. Now you got Wilmore, who's kind of now knows the system. He gets it. He's a physical back. He could pound away too. I mean, if he was good enough to play for SC, he was definitely good enough to play for Utah. So I say what those Trojan linebackers do against that defensive or offensive line. And I'm sure we know that Marlon Tuipulotu is going to be good. We'll see about Peely, because he's supposed to be getting a special cast on his hand for his finger. But no, in my opinion, it's going to get down to the offensive line of Utah against SC's front seven. And, if they can't control the offensive line, they're going to have some challenges.
I mean, that's it. There's really not a whole lot to add. It's how well Utah can run the ball. If Utah comes out and all of a sudden they've got a pass game clicking and they're throwing the ball 70%, I don't know what you do. That's not what you expect coming into this game. I mean, this is where Utah is going to want to run the ball, and USC has got to figure out how to get that stopped. And that is the key on that side of the ball. I think you take your chances however many times Utah wants to throw it. Yes, they've got a couple wide receivers, and Britton Covey is back, and he's a very dynamic slot receiver, and they've got some taller, 6'2", 6'3" receivers out there on the outside. I think USC feels just fine if Utah wants to try to throw the ball all game at them. And this is going to be something where USC's got to, and you mentioned it, Todd Orlando said it, they want to huddle up, they want to play big boy football with you. And this is something where USC saw it maybe a little bit with Arizona State, a little bit with Arizona, the run game, but nobody in the Pac-12 at this point, the Pac-12 South certainly, nobody brings that like Utah does. And so that's definitely going to be the key. Flipping over to the other side of the ball, USC's offense going against a Utah defense that just lost a ton in terms of personnel and starters to the NFL draft, to graduation from last year. There are some new faces everywhere, specifically in the secondary, some new starters up front, although guys that have played before. But for you, your key in that matchup, the USC offense against the Utah defense.
Well, you mean, yeah, the USC's offense, we know what they're going to do. They're going to throw the ball, and they're going to throw it against that secondary. The Utah secondary, no matter how talented they may be, is inexperienced and is young, and they're going to have blown coverages. It feeds right into what USC does, and that is pass the ball downfield. The question is will Kyle Whittingham play man-to-man in the secondary or zone it? I think he likes to play man-to-man, and he got burned last year in the Coliseum by Matt Fink. I would be shocked if they don't play a zone defense and drop, 8 guys back. The reason they can do it is, even though their rebuilt defense is, they're so physical, it's what they preach up front, that no matter who they put in as the 3 rushers, they're going to pound away. That physicality is not the name of the game for the SC offensive line, okay? And it's really going to be important that USC is able to deal with what they've got to deal with and do their thing. Because if they don't, Slovis could get knocked out of the game. There's no doubt in my mind that they're going to be coming to bring the wood. He got knocked out last time. And, in the sense that we know that there's going to be shots on him. And we've always said, can he survive even a 6-game season? And we're going to find out, because they're going to go after him. But in terms of the big advantage, it's if SC doesn't turn the ball over through interceptions or fumbles, it's such a huge advantage, their receivers against Utah. It's what happens when Utah goes to a zone. What will SC do? Are they willing to run the ball when Utah says, run it? Let's see you run it. And if Graham Harrell says, we don't do that, we don't take snaps under center, and the running game is kind of like a token, and I know they're going to go for 170 yards, that's their goal. But you know something? It's going to be tougher to do at Utah because of the style of defense that Utah plays, in my opinion.
I'll tell you what, 170 yards against Utah would be fantastic compared to what you look at last year. USC got nothing done on the ground against Utah last year. You mentioned Matt Fink had that big game. He had to have that big game because there was no running game against Utah. And you mentioned, does Utah play a zone? Do they change? I was shocked last year that they didn't. And so Clay Helton said this week, we expect them to do sort of what they always do. So unless, again, he can say whatever he wants to the media and publicly, but he's not publicly saying, hey, we think that they're going to, drop 8 and play a zone. What has really given this USC offense fits over the last couple of years, they're not saying we expect to see that. Now, does Utah make that adjustment, and do they drop 8 and do they sit in a zone? Again, not something that they typically do. I think that's sort of the biggest question. But for me, even before you get there, what does the ball look like coming out of Kedon Slovis's hand against Utah? You go back to Arizona, and there were so many balls where the offense is just not in rhythm, not on time. because he missed open receivers because the ball is coming out in a way that we are not used to seeing the ball come out of Keaton Slovis's hand. It is end over end. It is wobbly. It's getting hung up on deep balls. He's missing guys on crossing routes and post routes where they are open. That to me is the key. Keaton Slovis sort of explained it away with mechanics. Graham Harrell threw out the idea that it was a mental thing after the ball slipped once. Clay Helton said it was a slip issue the entire time where they couldn't, find a ball that worked with him, and the tackiness of the ball just wasn't there for him. You can answer all those questions right away, first throw against Utah. If it looks good and you really have kind of put those questions out of the way, then okay, you start working on that Utah secondary that, again, very inexperienced, no starts back there between anyone who's even going to be available on Saturday. But for me, that's it. That's the question. If Keaton Slovis is not on time and accurate with his ball, I don't think USC can all of a sudden just say, well, let's just run it instead. I think they've got to get a good performance out of him. And, you see the balls against Arizona, and he still finishes the game somehow 12 of 12 and a game-winning drive and 2 touchdown drives right at the end. So he was able to battle through it. But playing in that cold weather, if there really is something beyond just, the balls during the Arizona game were an issue, I think we're going to find out. And to me, that before anything else in terms of the matchup or who's out there or who's not, can Keaton Slovis get back to throwing the ball the way that we're accustomed to seeing him throw the ball?
Well, we've seen 3 different excuses on why he's doing what he's doing. They're either one of them's true, or all of them are true, or none of them are true. And I would suspect that if his ball comes out floating or wobbling, overthrowing receivers, it's going to be kind of, that is your answer right there. And if they don't want to, maybe he's got tendonitis in his elbow. I don't know what he's got, but like you said, 100%, that we're going to find out. Okay. And we're going to find out in a hurry. And I tell you what, I'm just going to be so focused on that Utah defensive line attacking him that it's going to be like watching maybe like when you go to watch a Nike camp with high school players, and they have the drill where the defensive linemen are rushing the offensive linemen, and there's just a tackling dummy, and they try to get to the dummy. And that's how I see almost every snap in the air raid. It's like, how long is it going to take? Because he's going to have to get the ball out of his hands in a hurry. And I can almost assure you, if they can get a shot on him, they'll take a flag if they can get to him.
Yeah, a big game for the USC offensive line, no doubt. No matter who Utah has out there and throwing it, this is a program that has built itself in the trenches, offensive line, defensive line, bringing in a bunch of guys. There's some talent up there and size too for that Utah defensive line. That I think we both agree is going to be a key matchup right there. Let's go ahead.
Can I ask one thing? We're talking about, because you mentioned it earlier, that Brett Nealon is a possibility. In the last couple of games, Brett Nealon has really had his hands full with nose tackles.
With big oversized guys right on top of him.
Yes. And it made me think that's going to be a test. If this guy has a leg injury, and I'm talking about Nealon, okay, that's going to be tested. And they're going to come right after him. They're going to try to straighten up. They're going to bull rush him. Okay. And even if he doesn't play, they're going to try to do the same thing with Didich. Didich might be the better option because he's more physically healthy. There doesn't seem to be a question. So keep an eye on Utah, what they do with their big nose tackle, and whether SC has to double team that nose tackle because the bull rush is just running right through, the SC centers.
Yeah, and then let's go. Give me your your intangible for the game, a stat, a situation, something that you feel like is going to go a long way to sort of tell the end story of what happens on Saturday night.
Well, I don't mean to be so provincial in it, but it's going to be turnovers. It's going to be turnovers. Whoever wins the turnover battle, as it usually happens. But I think more so in this game because Utah needs to get the turnovers to get the ball out of SC's offensive hands. SC cannot self-destruct on offense. They can't fumble. They can't throw interceptions because what's going to happen at some point, I don't care what somebody tells me, when you are playing your third game, you're in more football shape than somebody that hasn't played. So, a lot of what Utah does in the second half could be more on adrenaline as opposed to being in physical condition. But at some point in that fourth quarter, they could run out of gas on either side of the line of scrimmage. So, that's something to keep an eye on. But it's going to be those turnovers that are going to make the difference, in my opinion.
Yeah, and USC, you're not going to not commit a turnover the rest of the season, but you can't go back, right? When you commit 4 the first game, then none the second game, you got to stay closer to none than going back to 4 if you're going to talk about improvement and getting better throughout the year. So absolutely a key. And again, USC they've played in cold weather games before, but they're not going to have practiced in what it's going to be like at Salt Lake City. So holding on to that ball, catching passes, any kind of tip ball, anything like that, there's, I think, going to be something with that, a weather-related something that USC is going to have to overcome. For me, it's that same kind of discussion, but it's penalties, which sometimes a penalty can be the same thing as a turnover. If you get a holding call and all of a sudden it's 3rd and 20, you may as well have just fumbled it because you're giving it back to the other team most likely. So what they did against Arizona, some of the penalties, I understand. Okay, we're being aggressive, we're trying to make a play, we're doing something. Some of them, it's you can't even make that mistake in the first game of the season. That's just something that should not be even a possibility for your team. So you can't have double-digit penalties and triple-digit penalty yards. That's not going to help you against Utah. And you don't have the Utah home crowd, but you're playing there, and that those Utah coaches, they have had to watch every second of USC film, probably 10, 20 times because they haven't played yet this year. That they're going to be in the officials' ears. Hey, this guy's tugging a little bit. Hey, the offensive pass interferences where they throw the short pass and have guys blocking downfield. Every single coach in the Pac-12, has lobbed something at the officials pregame. Hey, they're going to do this. Watch out for this. And so USC is going to have to play, I think, even more of a clean game in terms of that, because you are going to get eyes watching some of these things. Chris Steele, a couple games with penalties now, and Todd Orlando said, hey, you can't go up to him and you can't tell him stop being aggressive. You can only show him this is what they're calling, and you've got to make those adjustments. Again, if he ever when he's on that Utah side, that's all he's going to be hearing from those guys. And so again, that's something where you've got to cut down on penalties. And that, I think, for me, it is the key, and maybe more so than turnovers, but certainly right there. I mean, if we're talking about one or the other, it's USC would rather have it be both that they cut down on for Utah. So again, that's the look. That's 2-0 USC going to face Utah, playing its first game, and certainly even with Utah facing what they're facing in terms of their roster makeup and who's going to be available. And Clay Helton said it on Thursday, expecting it to be a tough physical game, and what we've come to expect from this USC-Utah series ever since that very first game when Utah joined the Pac-12. So we'll take a look at and see on Saturday night if USC can maybe put the game away a little bit earlier than they've done the last 2 weeks. But we'll see how that turns out. For Greg Katz, this is Erik McKinney. Thanks for watching WeAreSC.